Thank you, Kalani, and good afternoon to everyone. And thank you to the organizers for inviting me to talk on journal production and publication this afternoon. I'm actually going to turn my video off because my camera is kind of doing its own thing and you can't see me anyway. Sorry, I'll fix that now. So I'm sure we can all agree that this part of the publishing journey is the best part because you know what the outcome is going to be and you know that it's not going to be a rejection letter. But that doesn't mean that, sorry, I'm just trying to change my slides. That doesn't mean that the acceptance letter is the end of the journey or the end of the race, as Dr. Jones said. There's still a little bit before you get to the finish line and you actually publish that article. And after all the hard work of writing and rewriting and revising and going through the peer review, you want to make sure that your paper is showcased in the best way possible and that people will be able to find it and be able to read it. So the simplest way I can describe the production process is that it starts with the normally MS Word version that you wrote and submitted and that was peer reviewed, and it turns that version into a final version that is published. I think I have a delay with changing my slides. Sorry, everyone. I'm just going to share that version, at least then I can move along.
No problem, Doc. Please take your time.
Sorry. So what is the purpose of the production process? It's to optimize the readability of your paper, the clarity of the text, the placement of the figures, the formatting of the tables, and to ensure a complete and publish-ready version that will be findable, searchable, and accessible to be read. This means all the metadata are included, things like the author's names, the keywords, the DOI, and that it's included in a format that is machine readable and therefore can be searchable. So the outputs of the process will be the metadata, those data that describe your paper, the authors, the keywords, the abstract. And often these are, as Dr. Jones explained, if it's a double-blind peer review, this information is removed. So you want to make sure that it's all included before you carry on. And then also the files that you're going to publish. So this depends a little bit on your paper and mostly on the journal, but usually it will be a PDF file. Sometimes it might include an HTML or an EPUB file. There might be supplementary files for your paper or even video or audio files. At this point, I just want to make a quick disclaimer. What I'm going to talk about is the process that we follow at the South African Journal of Science, which is a very typical process, but there are differences in what and how different journals do things. So I would explain the production process in 5 steps. The first step is the completeness check. This is to make sure that you have everything in hand that you need in order to produce a final published version from the version that was submitted and reviewed. Making sure you've got all the co-authors' names, the affiliations are correct. If there was perhaps a revision to the title, that you're using the correct title, that the keywords and the abstracts are in the correct format, because these are very important to be able to make your articles searchable for people searching the literature. You want them to be able to find the article. To make sure all figures mentioned are included. If you've cited 60 references, are there 60 references in your reference list? To make sure you've acknowledged your funding bodies, and then also information that is best practice in journal publishing. Things like the submitted date and accepted date of the manuscript. Things like the author's contributions and any competing interests of the authors. And then very importantly also, the publisher needs to ensure they have a license to publish your work. For some journals, you'll be asked to transfer the copyright of your paper to the publisher in order for them to publish. The next step is a formatting step, making sure the references are in the correct style, that you follow the journal's house style, that heading levels and subheadings are indicated correctly, that all the figures and tables have captions. And then a more in-depth copy editing step. That's looking critically at the content to make sure there's no typographical or grammatical errors, to make sure, as Dr. Jones mentioned, that each section is written in the correct tense, to make sure that the language is clear, that the paper is logical, that all the figures are legible, and if there are ethics, have you reported the ethics clearance? If you need permission to reuse any figures that are copyrighted, have you included those permissions? And this step normally occurs with the copy editor and the author working closely together to fine-tune all those things. At the bottom is just an example of a figure, just to show that if you submit a figure that is very small, when during the production phase that figure is reduced to be able to fit into the journal format, you won't be able to read the labels, the numbers that appear there, you won't be able to read those. Likewise, if you submit a very small figure and it needs to be enlarged to fit the journal format, if it's not of a sufficient resolution, then it will pixelate. So these are things hopefully authors check before they submit the paper, but oftentimes it's only during copy editing that we can get higher resolution figures and make sure that the presentation is optimal. The next step is layout or typesetting, and this basically is converting the document that was submitted in Word or LaTeX into the formats that you want to print. So typically for most journals, a PDF format and whatever other format. And this is done either by a typesetter, or some journals are lucky enough to have software that does at least the initial steps for them. And here's just to show you how formatting and typesetting can help to make a table more readable. By using spacing and shading appropriately, the table becomes more understandable. You can see the relationships between the columns and rows much more easily. And then the final step is proofreading. And that means you have to check every format, make sure that everything is included, you haven't accidentally left out a figure, the spacing is correct, everything reduced or enlarged in size is legible, you haven't lost formatting with your symbols, your italics, all the links work, you don't have broken links in your paper. And this is normally a journal proofreader, and then also the author will proofread a final version. And once all 5 steps are completed, then you have an article or at least files that are ready to publish. And then this slide also just shows you how each step contributes to making the final article searchable, readable, accessible. So this shows a PDF file ready for publishing. This is the sort of print-friendly traditional version that we still very much depend on. This is the same article in an EPUB format. EPUB formats are generally more accessible for screen readers for people who are visually impaired, and they're also much more responsive to the size of the screen. So the text will adapt to the size. If you're reading it on your phone or your iPad, you don't have to scroll up and scroll down to read it. And then this is an example of an HTML. The HTML format is very web friendly. It's interactive. You can click on the links and the tables and figures will open. And then finally, an XML format. You can see it's not people friendly. It is a machine readable format. So now we have our files ready to publish. We have to ensure that the metadata is entered correctly and captured in the right fields. And this screen just sort of shows the publisher version of our website and how we enter the metadata and what metadata is included, the title, the abstract, the contributors or authors, the metadata like the article type, the DOI, the galleys are the files, the PDF and EPUB, what issue this article is going to be assigned to, and then also funding data. And this feeds into a Crossref's funding database, and once entered in the correct fields, this information can be exported through we use OJS as a content management system, and there is a plugin that can export this information to those third parties, and they can also update their databases and know that this article was cited this funding body. So once that information is entered in the background, we then click publish, and this is what everybody can see on our website, the same information published and searchable. You can see the file types that we publish on the right side. There's a supplementary file for this article, the author's names, the affiliations, the ORCID IDs, the DOI of the article, the keywords, the abstract, the funding information at the bottom, and then also a machine readable license. That's the license we publish the author's articles under. They retain their copyright. So some of this information, as I said, is exported directly to third parties like ORCID and Crossref. But it doesn't stop there. The article's published, we're not done yet. We still need to disseminate to the journal subscribers, to any indexers and harvesters that we have agreements with, and that makes the article more discoverable. And it informs those funders and Google Scholar, ORCID, that this article has been published. It updates the author's profile on those platforms. And then we also want to share the article on social media, make it more discoverable. The authors can also share on their social media. We include a media release. And then finally, we also make sure the article is preserved. And this is through a dark archive on the web. So it's kind of like a worst case scenario. If our website crashes, if we lose all our backups, then we still have a version and all is not lost. These are just some examples of the indexers and harvesters that we work with that may be known to you. And then also the same paper that we published then appears afterwards on their own platforms and is discoverable by more people. So we often hear from authors, why does it take so long? And I hope that having shown you the process, that you understand a little bit of why it does take the time it takes. But how can you as an author ensure that that process is faster and smoother? Always follow the journal's guidelines, word limits, reference style, use a reference manager where you can, it does help, but also make sure that when you add in references to your reference library that you're including all the details. If you don't include the details, then it can't give those details back to you and your reference list will be incomplete. Ensure you include all the metadata, especially co-authors' details. Very often we get papers with they just didn't add the co-authors at the time because they wanted to submit in a hurry. That information is very important. Make sure you spell your co-authors' names correctly. And then if your paper requires ethical clearance or your research required ethical clearance, make sure you provide that information in the paper and any copyright permissions you may need. And then ensure that your figures are presented in the best resolution possible and will be legible when reduced to their final size. And please respond to requests from the journal timelessly. And if you won't be able to respond, just let them know in advance and they can plan around. And then I'm not sure, Kalani, do I have 1 more minute?
Yes, Doctor, please, 1 minute.
Okay, I just wanted to show you that it's not just the traditional PDF HTML files that can be produced and published. There are other file formats. This is a supplementary file that we published in 2016 that was linked to one of our articles on our YouTube channel. And then some journals publish audio summaries in addition to the article. And then I saw this very recently. This is animation that is embedded inside the PDF. So certain kinds of things that are easier to explain through a video than a figure or a table. This is possible for some journals, not our journal yet, but hopefully in the future. Thank you very much for your attention. Sorry about my screen sharing.